The historic meeting between Trump and Xi. Ukraine is in the spotlight.
It was an amazing meeting, but he's a tough negotiator, and that's not very good.
Trump ordered nuclear weapons tests to begin. Putin angered all of Europe.
Belgian Defense Minister Theo Franken warned Moscow.
If President Vladimir Putin launches a missile at Brussels, it will be a strike at the very heart of NATO, and then we will level Moscow to the ground.
The President of the United States still has an ace up his sleeve for the Kremlin.
We discussed many other options available to the president, and President Trump will use them as necessary.
Hungary's last hope. Trump and Orbán, November 7th, Washington.
The leaders will discuss how to protect Hungary from the consequences of American sanctions against Russian oil.
Stability is about Solovyov. He's already getting ready to destroy the French. I wonder how, well...
That's enough for a day and a half of war. But we'll kill you all.
Apparently Putin has a taste for boys. And different kinds too, when grown ones.
Oh Lord, look. You didn't know, did you, that my grandpa was like that? Then you fight just like your grandpa.
I try. And some are very little.
This is the historic meeting between Trump and Xi Jinping, which took place for the first time in the past 6 years. There were all sorts of expectations for this meeting, that Trump and Xi would basically strangle the Kremlin's power and force it to make concessions. The second scenario was complete confrontation, essentially the start of World War III. China says no, we want Russia to keep waging war, and moreover we want Taiwan. And Trump says, haha, well, let's play. But what was the real outcome of this meeting, from which our future, yours and mine, may depend, and indeed the course of world history? We'll discuss it in the segment, and then we'll go over everything in detail. Believe me, this is important. Let's watch the segment.
Donald Trump met with Xi Jinping in South Korea as part of his tour of the Indo-Pacific region. The main topics of the meeting were trade barriers between the countries and, of course, the Russia-Ukraine war.
They agreed to develop a more forward-looking joint agenda for political dialogue, which is in principle a very positive aspect of this meeting.
As a result of the meeting, the parties agreed to reduce the tariff on Chinese goods related to fentanyl, a synthetic opioid analgesic, from 20% to 10%. The overall level of U.S. tariffs will reach up to 47%.
The fundamental issues underlying the conflict between the U.S. and China have not gone anywhere. And these are very important questions, such as the fate of the island of Taiwan, and the possibility of imposing tariffs on Chinese goods specifically because of the purchase of Russian oil. Well, Trump said that these issues were not raised diplomatically, but in such cases, as a rule, when you don't reach an agreement, you say that we didn't talk about it.
The agreements regarding Ukraine turned out to be less productive. Despite the fact that, according to the U.S. president, Ukraine was discussed at length, initially Trump wanted to persuade Xi to reduce support for Russia, so that Putin would agree to end the war. It was not announced whether the parties reached any agreement in this regard.
A strategic dialogue of cooperation has been established between authoritarian Russia and authoritarian Beijing. And for Xi to risk that in exchange, he would have to receive something more substantial, meaningful, and significant, something that would truly match the high level of relations between America and Beijing. Since at the present time the relationship is more reminiscent of a logic of de-escalatory actions in the trade and economic sphere, I would not go so far as to say that a strategic alliance or dialogue has been established between Washington and Beijing.
Donald Trump rated the meeting 12 out of 10. By the way, this was the first meeting between the leaders of the US and China in the past 6 years.
Based on the statement, we see that there won't be any tariffs on Chinese goods, and there will be access for American agricultural products. On the surface, the statement seems positive. But how true that really is? Again, if we look at Trump's presidency, we remember, for example, Trump's statement that peace had been achieved in the Middle East after 3,000 years. I'm someone who reads the news about the Middle East, and what's happening there isn't even close. It reminds me of the so-called achievement of peace in that region. So Trump's statement that everything has been agreed with China, everything is wonderful, let's at least wait 48 hours and then see what happens.
Trump said that he had agreed with Xi Jinping on a visit to China in the spring of next year. After that, there will be a return visit by the Chinese leader to the United States.
By the way, it's also interesting that the visit by Merz, which is something we want to discuss, will be to visit Erdoğan in Turkey in the near future. This will be a real blow to Putin, an absolute one. Stanislav Jelikovsky is joining our broadcast now, and we will discuss all these issues. Stanislav is a candidate of political science and an international affairs expert. Stanislav, we're glad to see you. Hello.
Hello?
Well, let's go ahead and discuss this. So this is the first meeting in 6 years. Trump and Xi Jinping. Honestly, the feelings are mixed. Trump, as usual, responded in a very scattered way. In terms of meaning, he said everything was good, productive, but that's classic, that's typical for Trump. But nevertheless, we still didn't really understand, for example, from the words Trump said in the context of Ukraine, that maybe they should be allowed to fight. It's madness, but we'll all keep working in that direction. They didn't agree on anything. Or how do you see their dialogue overall? And by the way, let me remind you, it lasted, I think, only an hour and 40 minutes. That's quite short.
Yes, well, let's put it this way. It's an important step in any case in the context of improving relations between the US and China. And you really pointed out correctly that the last time Donald Trump and Xi Jinping met was 6 years ago. And if we're talking about presidents specifically, there was also a notable meeting between the leaders of these two countries, which took place 2 years ago in California, when Joseph Biden met with the same Xi Jinping. And at that particular time, there were the very first genuine attempts in many years to try to resolve, let's say, the significant differences and disagreements that existed, many of which, it should be noted, still remain to this day. And back then, let's say, that visit by Xi Jinping to California didn't really bring about significant progress. And when Donald Trump returned to the White House, let's say, even more obstacles and challenges emerged to improving relations between the two countries. And often it was precisely here that actions came from both sides. Trump, for example, with his tariffs, and Xi with his deeper cooperation with the Russian Federation. In other words, let's say these and other contributing factors have, so to speak, effectively prevented or at least made it more difficult to find common ground recently. But still, the meeting took place, and I think that in itself is a positive signal. For all of us, yes, of course, it's still too early to evaluate this meeting. Again, I wouldn't go around giving out scores like classic Donald Trump does. He gave it 12 out of 10. But that's understandable. If he really enjoys some particular meeting or event, he's always ready to present it as something much better, to really show that it was truly great. But if we're talking about reality and an outside perspective, then I would say that the meeting was just okay. Yes, it's historic, but still, there are a lot of questions about the topics that were raised, about whether we can say that now there will be a thaw in relations between the two countries. I think there are chances to improve relations, especially in the context of the current challenges. I think that Washington and Beijing are basically interested in this. There has been some progress regarding tariffs, as well as in trade and economic relations. But if we're talking about the Russia-Ukraine war, there is still a lot of uncertainty, yes. Well, apparently, according to Trump's words, China has agreed to cooperate on ending the war. But again, it's unclear how and in what capacity. I understand that Trump may have meant that they will continue to raise these issues, that perhaps some steps will be taken in this direction, especially if we're talking about in the diplomatic sphere. But in reality, it's important to understand that for now, China continues to maintain its only relationship with the Russian Federation. And in order to, let's say, weaken this alliance, a lot of effort will be required, including in the context of various proposals for the Chinese side, which so far have not yet been made, apart from the issues that have already been raised, in particular regarding tariffs, tariff reductions, and opportunities for the American agricultural market in China, and so on. We also know, for example, that Trump did not discuss with Xi Jinping the supply of Russian oil to China. It's actually a bit strange since I want to remind you that in recent months he has repeatedly been urging everyone to give up Russian energy resources, And this applies both to allies and to opponents. And he threatened to impose sanctions. And joint sanctions were imposed against the Russian companies Lukoil and Rosneft. So why wasn't this issue raised during the meeting? I think most likely Xi didn't want, so to speak, to cast a shadow. On this meeting, he wanted to show that everything was fine. In other words, only those issues were deliberately raised that were expected to go smoothly. But in reality, as we can see, that many still topics were not brought up, and there are many unresolved issues. The same goes, by the way, for the major trade agreement, which still has not yet been officially signed, remains pending. However, apparently it is all in progress. We can judge from the recent words of the American president that this issue will still be discussed. Well, we'll see. Maybe some major agreement will be signed. I would not rule out the possibility that this could potentially happen next year, perhaps during a possible visit by Trump to China, if it actually takes place. We'll see. But it seems to me that there will still be a lot, and there will be technical negotiations and meetings at various levels in order to balance such an agreement, because it will, let's say, need to address comprehensively a lot of different aspects. And you're right. One more thing. You mentioned Donald Trump's statement about the Russia-Ukraine war. And again, it was said that the two sides should essentially be allowed to continue engaging in fighting until a decision is made to negotiate. This is once again some kind of equating the aggressor country and the victim country, Russia and Ukraine, which is fundamentally wrong to do, because Ukraine does want to negotiate and is ready to negotiate, but the American president, once again, let's say, uses this kind of rhetoric. Perhaps these were a kind of gesture towards Xi. I don't know why. Well, considering that China and Russia are such strategic partners and support each other on the international stage, maybe he simply didn't want to cast a shadow over this meeting again. Well, let's see. This really is an important event. But the most interesting thing is whether this meeting will have any further development. That is, whether it has influenced the improvement of relations between the countries and, in general, the current geopolitical climate is quite complex and ever-changing. We don't know the outcome yet, but at this particular moment in time, we can express a certain degree of optimism about the situation. We'll see how things develop in the coming days and weeks. Time will tell.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
Stanislav, I can't help but ask you, more precisely I have to ask you, about the meeting between Trump and Orbán. After all, it is scheduled for November 7th. What should we expect from this meeting? And at the same time, let's briefly go over this meeting. And after that, let's touch on another meeting, which I think is no less important. That's Scholz, who is also planning to visit Erdoğan. It's an interesting discussion, because it's been a long time since European leaders have met with Erdoğan at this level. Let's begin. Orbán, Trump. What will they talk about?
I think first and foremost, the parties will raise issues related to energy. And it's very important for the American president that Europe increasingly, let's say, moves away from Russian energy resources. And I think that Trump won't just demand that Orbán give it up. In fact, that won't be so easy either. But he will offer some alternatives in exchange. Again, things like American oil, gas, liquefied natural gas, and so on. And also, issues will be discussed about how these can be supplied. I think that's pretty clear. Most likely, the most optimal and suitable option is through Croatia. The only thing is that prices may be higher than those that exist now at this time. For Hungary, the prices are set by Russia. And that's why Orbán is still fighting to keep the possibility of receiving at least Russian oil. That's it. And by the way, Slovakia has exactly the same problem. And it seems to me that for now, these countries can continue moving in this direction. But for Orbán, it's especially important, particularly considering that in half a year, Parliamentary elections will soon be held in this country, and Viktor Orbán would, of course, very much like his political party, Fidesz, to win them again so that he can continue to keep his position as prime minister and remain in office. What other questions will there be? I think the issue of the Russian-Ukrainian war and the possibility of a peaceful settlement will definitely be raised, including, at the very least, the parties will bring up the topic of holding summits in Budapest. I think that Orbán will, in fact, try to persuade the American president to make it happen, because this could also have a positive impact on the political standing of the Hungarian prime minister, especially if it turns out to be a success. So I think these are the possible scenarios. Well, in addition, of course, there will also be talks about bilateral cooperation. This is very important, especially now when Donald Trump is in power in America, who has quite good relations with Viktor Orbán. There is a lot to discuss here. The agenda should be packed. Moreover, it should also be mentioned that Hungary has close ties with China. The Celestial Empire, or rather its companies, see the Hungarian market as promising. Factories and various other facilities are being built there, and so on. In other words, China sees Hungary as an opportunity, an additional opportunity to access the European market as such. And I think that here, Orbán can also boast that he has such close ties and perhaps will also offer some of his own services in the context of cooperation with China. Well, he believes that Hungary should play this role. That is the role of a bridge between the West and the East.
Stanislav, we have just a minute left for the conclusion. Still about Scholz's visit to Turkey. Please comment on what you think could become points of contact between the leader of Turkey and the leader of the largest economy in Europe.
Well, as is already known, Friedrich Merz is making a visit to this country, and during it he stated the need to strengthen the strategic partnership. The partnership between Europe and Turkey is a very important signal, considering that Turkey is located at the crossroads of important routes and, let's say, even civilizations. I think this visit can be characterized as such, as a desire to strengthen ties in the areas of security, the economy, and various others, especially considering that Turkey is indeed playing an increasingly important role both in the region and in the world as a whole. Therefore, in my opinion, this visit is indeed very important. Let us, so to speak, hope that cooperation between Germany and Turkey will become stronger. And this will also have a positive effect on the overall geopolitical context.
Stanislav, thank you very much. Stanislav Jelikovsky, an expert on international affairs, was on air with Ukraine Today. All the best.